Alright, welcome back to another video by the Canadian Home Painter. In today's video I'm just going to be showing what I do to paint door casing and a wall. First, I'm using some putty to fill in the miter and also the nail holes. They were never filled in with putty, so I'm going around all the casing and just making sure all the holes are filled. I use a putty. It goes on pink, and then when it's dry, it dries white. So you know when you're ready to paint. After I've filled all the nail holes, then what I like to do is just take a warm rag and wipe down the casing. That way you don't have to do any sanding. There's no heavy spots where too much was put on. It's all nice and clean, and when it's dry you can just paint right over it. As you can see, there is some damage on the left side of that casing. Now that's most likely when the new casing was put on, perhaps some of the drywall was attached to the old casing, and so it pulled some of the paper away. Doesn't look very nice, but there is an easy solution, and that is with this paintable caulking. Now, as you'll see, I'm putting on quite heavy because I want to make sure all of that damaged area where that paper has been torn away is nice and covered. And paintable caulking is the easiest, quickest fix for something like this. Now, I like to just get the excess off with my index finger. So make sure you have an old rag or some paper towel to wipe off the excess onto. And then you're going to want to run your finger over it a few times. You want that all to be nice and smooth. But once it dries, you're good to just paint right over. Give it a sufficient amount of time to dry before you start putting on your primer. So there were some repairs on that wall, so I wanted to just prime it, and I'm just going over everything now with a coat of primer before I put on my first coat of the door and trim paint. After I get everything primed, then I will let that dry for a few hours. I have other things to do in the meantime, so I'm just going to give that a sufficient amount of time to dry. As you can see, the wall, I have rolled a coat on the wall, which is fine. Now I'm going to apply a nice couple coats. I just show the first coat in this video, but you do the same steps for the second coat, but a nice couple coats of the door and trim paint on all the casing and the doors and the baseboard. So this paint, if you are wondering, it does have a pearl finish, so it's a bit shinier than a satin finish, less shinier than a semi-gloss. I really like it. It's by a paint that is called Seco Door and Trim, and I really like the finish. My customers really like it. After I give it sufficient amount of time to dry, all paints are different. Make sure you read the label. This, though, I would have given it probably between 6 and 8 hours after the second coat. And now I'm ready to put the tape on. I generally do like to use tape, especially on casing, because your eye is so close to it. You know, it's eye level. If you want to just get a nice, crisp, straight line, then, tape is usually the way to go, especially for the do-it-yourselfer. Now, after I put it on with my finger, I don't really have fingernails, but it's always good to get something hard. Even a credit card would work, but I use the metal end on my knife just to make sure there's no bubbles, no ripples. That tape is very tight to the casing. And then I'll start with my first coat of the wall color. Nice and nice heavy coat, but also feathered out and blended in. But your first coat, you want it to be just a good coverage right up against that tape. Another reason tape is good when you are using caulking, I find it just helps to just give it a real crisp straight line. So that is an 1.5" brush I'm using, but by the time I'm done, I've feathered it away from that casing, probably 3 inches or so. That just helps things to blend better. No ridges. And then, as you see, I'm taking the tape off right away. I like to remove it right when it's wet, after I get the last little bit painted on. So that is going to be wet paint on the tape, so make sure you have a garbage bag or something to put it into, obviously. And that's going to be a nice, crisp, straight line. After that first coat has had time to dry, I'm going to cover everything with the second coat of the wall color. It's a drop ceiling in this basement, so it's drop ceilings are quite easy to paint up against. There's usually a little tiny gap where the metal angle meets the wall, so it's easy to do your cutting up to it. Then with my second coat, I don't have to get right tight. I have a nice crisp line to go by, as long as I get within, you know, 1/8 of an inch or something. Then it's easy just to follow that straight line from when I had the tape on. Same thing, you want to feather it out, feather it away from the casing. I will flip my brush around, you'll notice. Sometimes I do like to use these 1.5" angled brushes. For up against the drop ceiling, you'll see I have the long end going up to it, but sometimes against casing, I will flip it around and use the short end of the angle. You'll get a feel for it, but I do suggest to use an angled brush. And personally, the 1.5", I find it just puts on the right amount of paint. I'm very happy and comfortable with the 1.5". I have used 2 inches, and I do like them as well, but I seem to always go back to the 1.5". Now for rolling, I'm going to roll right as soon as I get the cutting done while the paint is still wet, because I'm rolling over top of where I've brushed, and it'll just blend everything a lot nicer to do that all at once. For that, I'm using a 10mm roller sleeve, lint-free roller sleeve. And you just want to have a nice coat applied nice and evenly over the surface. And it's not a race. Take your time. Get it on nice and smooth. And that is how I do it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I appreciate the likes and sharing it. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to be notified about upcoming videos. So that's the finished product. When it's all dry, it looks pretty good. You don't see any damage. It's a nice straight line.